Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? Let me know if you can't for some reason. I'm getting a thumbs up. Welcome, I'm so glad you're here for this workshop tonight on eating for immunity. I see that you've already muted your microphones, that's helpful. Definitely if you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask. Maybe raise your hand and ask. And if you're more comfortable typing it in the chat, that works for us too. And without further ado, I introduce to you Melanie Fielstra and Dr. Jeff Wulfman. Hi guys, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Emily.
And it looks like we have Heather and was it Kitty, the other participant?
I think so.
Yeah.
S. Sears.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm Melanie Fielstra. I'm a functional nutritional therapist and GAPS practitioner. I'm not sure which camera to look at, but probably that one. Okay. I work with clients all over the country with a focus on, well, functional nutrition and gut health. Addressing issues ranging from autism to eczema to hormone issues and all kinds of digestive disorders. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Jeff Wulfman, and I'm a family physician and have been practicing integrative and functional medicine for 15 or 20 years. And have been working with people with chronic illness for a long time, and eating and nutrition is a passion of mine, and it's one of the things that I feel is a foundation for good health, and certainly a foundation for healthy immunity. And so we're going to dive into that today. We're going to start with some broad concepts and then work down into some details. And would love this to be a interactive engagement. So we totally welcome questions. Raise your hand. Hang on. What about such and such? Let's have a discussion like we were sitting around a table, and hopefully we can pass along some information. And we want to hear what you have to say also. So we'll move ahead.
All right.
So let's just start with some basics. The title of the talk is Eating for Immunity, and different people have different ideas around what even those words mean or what the immunity is or the immune system. So looks like we just have a couple participants here, but when you hear immunity or immune system, what does that mean to you, or what comes to mind? What are its functions and purpose?
Feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
Or type it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we'll move forward.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Heather Madison says, I think about my body's defense system.
Oh, good one.
excellent. So
Good
defense system, defending your body against things that are possibly not in your best interest, or that may be harmful, or that are foreign. So that's a great lead into the concept of immunity. And so our immune systems have co-evolved over millennia to determine the difference between self and other. And up until quite recently, that has been a slow process. Like our microbes in our external environment change, and then our immune system sort of figures that out, and then things slowly change, and we're exposed to maybe some new plants or foods if we've moved somewhere, or eating patterns change, and there's a slow change of our system recognizing self from other over a very long time. However, that has changed drastically in just the last few generations, that the modern world has an onslaught of other, that is, things that are not in us or that we've never been exposed to before. There are up to 100,000 man-made substances that have only been created in the last few generations. So our immune systems haven't had time to sort of figure out what's friend, what's foe. So there's not a hard definition between what is self and what is other, but I like to break other down into microbes, that is parasites, bacteria, yeast, viruses, fungi, other organisms that are in our environment or even on us or in us. And those microbes or other can be beneficial, can be helpful to us, help our digest our food, keep away crowd out other harmful bacteria. It can be neutral, where we're just coexisting and there's really no net harm benefit, or they can be harmful. And even the same microbes, when they're in balance, can be beneficial, but if it gets out of balance, it could be a harmful relationship. So it's constantly changing. It's not like these are bad and these are good necessarily, but it can be a balance. And then in the other category are other non-microbial substances that are made in nature. So these plants right here are other. They're not part of me, but I get benefit by looking at them, but they're not harmful. And then there's the whole host of man-made substances. Again, they can be neutral, they can be helpful, or they could be harmful to our systems. So just kind of wanted to set that context that that's what our immune system is doing, is interacting with both living and non-living things to figure out what's friend, what's foe, what do I need to deal with, what do I not need to deal with. And that comes into play very much when we're eating for immunity. So what is the interface between you and these things that are other? There's sort of three main interfaces of us and other. One is the most easily seen, is our skin. And so that's a barrier between us and the exterior world. It's fairly tough and mostly impermeable, but it does absorb some things. So our skin is a first line of defense to separate our bodies from the external world. And then also our lungs. So the air we breathe that contain particles or pollen from this flower or viruses or other microbes, and it hits the lining of our lung. That's the other interface of us and other. But the biggest by far of the interface with us and the external world is the lining of our gut. So we have a hole at one end and a hole at the other end, and then there's this big long tube. And if you took that big long tube of our intestines and you unfolded it and laid it out flat, it would cover, I don't know, tennis court? Football field? It's a lot. Like the surface area of your gut lining is the biggest surface that interacts with the external world, which is what goes into your mouth. So the integrity of the gut lining is critical to that interaction of food and the health of the gut lining, the health of what's next to the gut lining, which is where a good deal of the immune system rests, is in the lining of the gut. And so
like 70 to 85% of our immune system is there.
Yeah. So when we talk about eating for immunity, we're going to make sure we bring in the health of that interface, that gut lining, because it's critical in terms of your immune system and how it functions. So I want to talk a little bit about microbes and your microbiome. We, as an organism, are not just like a singular organism. We are actually a holobiont. And what that means is that, okay, there's my cells, like my skin cells, but actually I'm outnumbered 10 to 1 in terms of the total number of cells that is in this body. There's 10 times more microbial cells than there are my cells. And so the majority of that is in your intestinal tract. However, we also have organisms in our tissues, in our bloodstream, in our brain, in the fluid of our eyes, in our fingernails, in our eyelashes, on our skin, everywhere.
Incredible.
And so a holobiont is where many species are all functioning together for an organism. So what really are we? Like, we're really a combination of thousands of species of organisms in an ecosystem. So the overlap between me and microbes is significant, but your immune system is in the interface of that. So your immune system is really like a microbial management system. It's constantly trying to figure out, okay, do I need to worry about this? Do I need to worry about this? How do we keep this in balance? And so I just really wanted to bring that home, because the other part that we're going to talk about that's connected to eating for immunity is how it affects our microbiome and our microbes, because they are us, actually. So we can't just ignore that. The other thing I wanted to touch on is feeding behavior. So the title of the slide is "My Microbes Made Me Do It." So if we think about the factors of why do we choose the specifics of what we want to eat. So if I went to a cafeteria, or if I go into the co-op, like I'm wandering around and I'm making a choice, like what do I want to put in my body? Or if I'm at a dinner where there's multiple options, like what's leading to me choosing the specific things that I put in my mouth. So there's certainly societal and cultural norms, like, hey, this is what we do in the Western world. In New England, we kind of eat this way, or this is how I grew up eating. There's also access issues. We are so blessed here in Vermont and where we are that we actually have the physical access to get a wide range of nutrient-dense whole foods, and many places don't. Like if it's not in a box or a bag, they can't get it, which is so sad. But also our feeding behavior, what we choose, there's very much can be an addictive component to eating. Like certain foods will cause dopamine release, which is a brain chemical that's like our reward center. It's what is released when people do certain drugs. There can be emotional eating. I've got a couple food addictions myself.
Red Hot Blues.
Red Hot Blues. Yes, Red Hot Blues, I confess. And so there's that, but also a very underappreciated aspect of what leads to the choices you make in feeding behavior is your microbes. Mm-hmm. So they have been around longer than we have as like a group, and they know how to get what they want. So and this has been shown in studies, they can actually make you want certain foods that feed them. For instance, people who have yeast overgrowth or yeast imbalances, they love sugar. And so that often can lead to like unexplained cravings that actually they release neurochemicals and substances that make you seek out what they want. I had a patient one time who was struggling with yeast imbalance and overgrowth issues and really bad sugar cravings, and we were working on trying to get her yeast down and all this, and came back and I said, how's it going with the sugar cravings? And she said, well, the candida overlords have been very active. So it can be pretty profound. And this has been shown in parasite studies too, that parasites will control feeding behavior and make their host go and get them what they want. So I just wanted to bring that in because it's not all your fault, okay? Yeah. So one of the core foundations we want to talk about, if we're talking about the immune system, we're talking about inflammation. And I like the concept of fire. That an activated immune system is like a fire, that it is releasing chemicals that are hot, that are stimulating the surrounding tissues. And everywhere you hear about inflammation, there is an epidemic of chronic inflammation across our population. And I would say almost without an exception, all chronic illnesses or diseases have an inflammatory component. So it doesn't matter what chronic illness you look at, when they do studies to see, okay, what's their immune system look like? They're all inflamed. It's even depression, schizophrenia, heart disease, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, cancer, they all have chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic Lyme disease, all of it, like their level of inflammatory substances are very high. So it's like a fire.
Those inflammatory substances, do you mind listing off a couple of them? Yeah,
so the general category would be cytokines. Like you may have heard even recently, like with some of the virus stuff, there can be a cytokine storm, and which and then there's histamines and interleukins and leukotrienes and all these chemicals so what makes you feel bad? Like if you have a viral infection or something, it's not the virus, it's your immune system attacking it and then releasing these chemicals. And that's what makes you feel bad. The achy, fatigue, flu-like causes a fever response and brain fog and all this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So if you can imagine that's going on a smoldering basis, then that contributes to a lot of symptoms and illness. So I like to think about it in terms of fuel. Like, okay, if inflammation is a fire needs fuel. Like what things are fueling the fire? And this is where we're going to get into eating for your immunity. Like, are certain things that we're putting into our system actually throwing fuel on that fire? And our immune systems are fighting what I call fighting on 1,000 fronts. Like because of all these sort of unusual things that we're exposed to, man-made things, our immune systems are like, do I attack here? Do I do this? What do I do? And so they're confused and overwhelmed. So it behooves us to take control of the things we can control. I like looking for underlying causes, like, okay, so if there's a fire and there's all kinds of inflammation, well, what's causing it? What's causing inflammation? So looking for underlying causes. Well, here's Dilbert. He went to the doctor looking for an underlying cause. He said, I'm addicted to the internet because it's more interesting than people. And he asked the doctor, is there a pill that you can give everyone else to make them more interesting? He goes home frustrated and says, the doctors never want to treat the underlying problem.
So leading on from the inflammation discussion, I don't know if Heather or our other participant want to chime in. But what are some factors you think of that contribute to inflammation? What does that make you think of? Feel free to type in the chat box or just raise your hand if you want to answer that question with what you think.
What are some things that can increase inflammation or make someone inflamed?
Yes.
Sugar comes to mind.
Sugar?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Definitely.
And maybe stress.
Yeah.
Stress. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Alcohol.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Although a little red wine's good. All right. So one of the biggest factors leading to inflammation is what is informally called leaky gut. The kind of more professional term for it would be intestinal permeability. So the integrity of the gut lining is weakened, and there's actually holes or larger holes by which, different substances, undigested foods and toxins and other kind of waste products go through the gut lining instead of, being excreted, and they get into our bloodstream. So that's what we call a leaky gut situation. And here are a bunch of things that lead to leaky gut and therefore lead to inflammation. So antibiotics would be one, steroids, the pill, and other prescription meds in general. Stress and fear, like Emily said. We're going to talk quite a bit about modern diet, and that's the effect of that on leaky gut and inflammation. Infections. So what was that term that you were wanting to add to that?
Well, how the microbiome is a big,
the microbial
is a
balance.
huge part of
Yes.
the gut integrity.
So
also.
pathogenic microbes kind of overrunning the digestive system, causing any range of like chronic diarrhea or SIBO or all kinds of issues. And then bottle feeding or any dead processed food is going to be problematic for your gut lining, aging, and then pollution, as Jeff mentioned earlier, the 80 to 100,000 man-made chemicals that we're subjected to on a regular basis now. They're pretty harmful to your gut. Radiation, alcohol, as you mentioned, Emily, and then dental work is another one. So what happens when we get exposed to one or multiple or all of those, it leads to a compromised digestive fire, so to speak. So I think of digestion as a north to south process, and in the northern parts, like our stomach and our gallbladder and our pancreas, they all excrete substances that are what I call our digestive fire. They're responsible for chemically breaking down our food, and that leads to undigested food and the whole cascade of events, and then a lack of protection for the beneficial bacteria, and pathogenic microbes then take over and attack, and they have their own toxins that then break down the gut lining further. And then what happens is we have the breakdown of the actual cells that make up our gut lining, the enterocytes. They become weakened, they lose their ability to digest our food, and they just degenerate.
Do you have a scientific picture of the weakened?
There we go. The little guy on the left is a healthy enterocyte with all his little digestive enzymes, and the guy on the right would be what we'd see in that's a very scientific picture of what we would see
Right from a microscope.
if there was a leaky gut and dysbiosis and all that.
Question. Once the little guys in there are looking like the sick enterocyte, are there ways to rejuvenate them, or is that just lost at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so there's a pretty
Right
quick turnover of enterocytes. They have a pretty short life cycle. So with that, all the nutrient factors that we're going to talk about and gut healing foods, they not only it's pretty quick to turn that scenario around in certain situations.
Yeah, it's kind of like the skin; they're constantly being shed, and so the new ones can be healthy ones. It's not like a nerve cell, sort of like there, but these are constantly turning over.
So those little enterocytes get sick, and there's a loss of integrity. The tight junctions, so to speak, or the holes in your intestinal lining get bigger, and foods absorbed undigested or just partially digested, and toxins get into your bloodstream, and the immune system sees all of that as foreign and mounts an inflammatory response, and that can show up in many different areas of the body. So I just gave a few examples here.
And it's like that's the integrity of that interface of the gut, self and other. Instead of only allowing through certain things, it becomes big, and big things come through that your immune system on the other side normally wouldn't see. And so it's like, what's this? And then it attacks it as though it's an infection or it's something foreign, which then leads to a multitude of
inflammation, and overactive and over-responsive immune system, and eczema, psoriasis, acne. Those are just a few things that can show up in the skin. Brain fog, depression, anxiety, autism, more brain-related inflammation, and then gut inflammation, like SIBO and IBS and Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, and then pain and stiffness, and there's just any that inflammation can migrate, all over the body. So here's kind of a broad spectrum overview of the intestinal picture, the leaky gut, food particles, toxins, alcohol, and other components going into the bloodstream, and then the immune system responding, and then the inflammation that goes on from there.
So this is just another question, and it's a little bit connected to what we talked about before. But So we have control over, for the most part, what we put in our mouth and what things that we eat do you think are pro-inflammatory or potentially increase inflammation in terms of food? So Emily, you had mentioned sugar. Yeah, absolutely.
Alcohol.
And alcohol. What else?
What about pesticide residues in foods and in our water?
Yeah.
Pesticide and herbicide residues.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Seen as a foreign object, and actually glyphosate or Roundup increases leaky gut, and so can then lead to inflammation that way.
Heather mentions processed foods.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. So foods that have been pulled apart, taken apart, again, modified, heat modified, so the proteins are in a different shape and are seen as something strange and foreign by the system.
And broken down into like single components rather than whole foods.
Yeah. How about things that we eat or drink that might be anti-inflammatory? What are some things that come to mind for that?
Think about things like pineapple with bromelain.
Some enzymes.
Turmeric for sure. Yeah, so that's a anti-inflammatory spice and a fruit with the enzymes and whole foods in it.
Fish oils are anti-inflammatory, like omega-3 fatty acids are pretty anti-inflammatory.
You're stealing my thunder. That's
okay,
a future
sorry.
Please try to contain your comments. Okay. All right. So on the left we have, and now everybody's different, okay? So it's not like, but sugar is incredibly inflammatory. It's like, so if we went back and looked at that fire metaphor, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. It just, explosion. Refined carbohydrates, so there's carbohydrates in broccoli, but that versus refined white flour is a very different thing, and white flour is almost sugar-like. And gluten, and we won't get into all the stuff around gluten, but many people are having inflammatory responses to gluten. Modified and damaged fats, which you don't hear that much about, but I think they're also a problem. So fats that have been refined, if they've been heat damaged or oxygen damaged, are rancid, are seen by the system as a toxin, basically, in response to food preservatives. And then as Melanie was talking about this omega-3 imbalance, like most vegetable oils are omega-6, which are a little bit inflammatory, and then the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, so that's often out of balance. And then different people may have different sensitivities.
Yeah, like the clients that I work with, pretty much across the board, we do food sensitivity testing, and I'll find a client who's sensitive to cabbage and chicken, which you would not think to be inflammatory, but for their particular individual system, that's a sensitivity. So therefore it would cause an inflammatory response, even though in and of itself, chicken and cabbage are not inflammatory. Until we can, work on healing their gut, that particular food is, can be problematic for them.
And can those food sensitivities change as you improve in healing?
Yes, absolutely. I see a lot of food sensitivities resolved after doing digestive healing work.
So something they were reacting to before,
right.
And eventually they don't react to it,
right?
Like they did.
Right.
Cool.
It is cool.
Back to the modified and damaged fats. So that could even include like some, nut and seed oils, right? That we might think of as being healthy, but if they've been sort of heavily processed
or mishandled, they need to be, kept cold and dark and not kept out on an open shelf.
Yeah.
And
oxygen and heat can lead to rancidity, and different oils have different smoke points, and so if they're heated too high, they'll change their shape and then become something different than what you had expected or been. Yeah. And there are anti-inflammatory foods that help modulate the immune system and calm it down and nourish it. So the first category is complex phytonutrients. So I heard a lecturer one time said, he's like, if you got 100 nutritionists in a room and you ask them all what's the healthiest way to change your diet, the only thing they would agree on is eat more vegetables. So there's all these different diets and opinions, but vegetables have a broad spectrum of nutrients, which I'm going to go into a little bit more later. And the other thing I want to speak of on that is variety. So we evolved as a species eating dozens of different plants, maybe even hundreds of different plants. And that's been just narrowed down. Like the average American, and you do not want to be an average American, let me tell you, eats like 3 vegetables: potatoes, lettuce, and maybe carrots or a tomato. Like, so the variety has been lost. So I'm a huge proponent of like each different plant, like an asparagus and a broccoli and a beet, have a totally different spectrum of nutrients. And so by bringing in more of those, you're basically you have a bigger medicine cabinet, so to speak.
Yes.
And they're much more effective in calming things down. And you're less likely to get sensitivities. If you eat the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, you're more likely to become sensitive to that. And then fruits, nuts, and seeds. Nuts are an awesome source of healthy fats. And because they're still in their natural state, that fat is much more stable because it's got all the antioxidants around it and it doesn't become rancid as easily. The other thing is nourishing fats. So fats that are in their natural state, unrefined, undamaged, with making sure you're getting omega-3. And then clean protein. And you hear that term. What's that mean? If it's animals that have been raised in a humane way. They aren't stuffed full of corn and soybeans. They eat their natural diet, and the meat and the nutrient content reflects that. Not only what you eat, but what you ate. So it's healthy, clean proteins, and
grass-fed,
pastured eggs, and all that. And then for the vegetarians, and broad spectrum of beans and so forth. And then herbs and spices. So I imagine most of you have maybe even used some herbal medicine, and dietary or flavor herbs are culinary. That's what I was aiming for. Culinary herbs are medicinal. They may not have as strong medicine, but they are medicinal. So herbs used in food throughout history is not just for flavor. Like it actually, both herbs and spices were sort of intuitively brought into the food to prevent illness. And it's interesting anthropologically, like the spices that are used in certain parts of the world are actually like spices that are specifically prevent infections and parasites in that area. So it's pretty cool. And it's important to get them as fresh as possible, still vital, not, something that's been in a, warehouse in China for 6 months or something like that. So,
or irradiated.
Yeah, irradiated or whatever. So that they're still vital. So liberal use of herbs and spices, again, gives you that broad spectrum of anti-inflammatory medicine. And food is your medicine. And those are more medicinal and usually used in smaller portions. So speaking of individual food sensitivity, here's the poor gingerbread man. He went to his doctor trying to figure out what's going on. He said, I have bad news. You're allergic to wheat, eggs, sugar, raisins, and ginger. So he doesn't have a lot of options left. So modern food is in general, is pretty deficient in nutrients. And I just want to touch on that. And why is that? Why is our modern food kind of deficient? Well, our soil has become depleted over the generations. The minerals have been washed out. As Heather had mentioned, like processed foods where they pull things apart and we're not getting the whole food. We're not eating very many species or types. Monocropping. And then also hybrid, like the current hybrids of vegetables they have been bred for appearance and shelf life. Like that was the role of the whole breeding program. Natural or abnormal is to make it look good and last longer on the shelf. Because 100 years ago, like the throwaway rate for produce was huge. Like stuff would get shipped and they'd have to throw away like 40, 50% because it would wilt or get spots on it. But the stuff that in the plant that made it do that is actually like the volatile compounds that make it rot. So our like heirloom varieties have more nutrients than like the modern varieties that look nice and pretty and smooth. And then also we are in the midst of a mineral famine. This is the mineral content of vegetables from 1914 to 1997. So this is the average of several minerals in cabbage, lettuce, tomatoes, and spinach. And you can see it's gone from 400 milligrams down to, 75 in the same amount of plant. So we really, have to be mindful to make sure we're just meeting basic needs.
And is that also a result of soil depletion and just generally not taking good care of our soil and the way we're growing food?
It's the soil depletion and the hybridization of the plants. Yeah, both of
and
those.
And the loss of diversity and different inputs.
And the plant. So speaking of microbiome, just like us, the plant has to have a diverse microbiome in the soil in order to actually soak up minerals. So even if they're there, if there's not a nice rich microbiome in the soil, they can't access it. So taking that into ourselves, if we don't have a nice rich diverse microbiome in us, even eating good food, it's hard for us to assimilate it and bring it in.
You can be eating the most pristine, perfect, clean diet, and if you're not digesting and absorbing it, it kind of doesn't matter. You're wasting food dollars if you're not digesting.
So it's a little quiz. This is the ingredient list for 2 different products. Which of these products would be most nutritious, or which one would you like to eat? So on the left, you can see lamb brown rice, blah, blah, blah. On the right, some white flour, some textured vegetable protein, little partially hydrogenated altered soybean oil, and
yellow number 5.
Yellow number 5, well, MSG. Okay, let's see what those are. Well, on the left, that was the ingredient list for Eagle Pack dog food, and on the right was the ingredient list for Tombstone deep dish pizza. Now, one looks better than the other when it's lying on a plate, but the actual ingredients are significant.
Your dog's eating better than you.
Dogs eat better than people in this country. Okay, I can't talk about nutrition without harping on sugar. The number 1 source of calories in the United States of America is
high fructose corn syrup.
High fructose corn syrup, and then sugar and all its sort of other permutations. It's a drug. It acts like a drug. It's addictive. Rats will choose it over cocaine eventually. Like it's this big problem. So in 1900, the average American consumed 5 pounds a year, and now it's over 130 pounds a year of sugar per person. And soda is probably the number 1 with 56 gallons per person per year consumed.
Yikes.
And like I mentioned before, we have to keep our eye on white flour. It's awfully close to sugar.
Or white rice.
White rice and, fluffy white potatoes. And those, in excess, those are quite sugar-like, and the body sees them like similarly to sugar. Yeah. As opposed to a whole grain that has the bran and the germ and the matrix of the fiber all mixed up with it. So one more visual. Here's a sun-kissed soda. It has 84 grams of sugar, which is equal to 21 teaspoons or 7 tablespoons. It's the same amount of sugar that's in 6 ice cream sandwiches.
Yum.
Oh my gosh, that looks so much better. Is that from your kitchen?
It is.
Could you, no, wait, I'm not sure. This one, I think I'll go for that.
Look at all the colors, the phytonutrients. We've got carrots and green beans and red onions and I think red cabbage even, some cauliflower.
Nice.
Probably some garlic.
Olive oil?
I probably
tossed it.
What
do you use? Grass-fed butter?
Probably melted lard or tallow or coconut oil.
Okay. All right. So there's variety, like there's multiple species, there's multiple colors, and it's well, and it's combined with some healthy fats and
we get some radishes.
radishes. Awesome. Radishes are very medicinal. Treat parasites. Okay. So you hear whole food, and like we talked about before, each whole food in its natural state, like if you can pick it, pluck it, dig it, catch it, like in that state, there are hundreds of ingredients in there. Like plants have thousands of different bioflavonoids, which are more in the pigments. One of the important ones is quercetin, which you can also buy as a supplement. Quercetin is anti-inflammatory, it's antiviral, it helps zinc get into cells, which we hear about these days a lot. It's in leafy greens, broccoli, berries, like that's just one of the many bioflavonoids that's present. So let's just take one whole food ingredient and see what's in it. So garlic is, you went too fast.
Sorry.
That was going to be a punchline coming.
Okay.
Garlic is very medicinal. It's used throughout the whole world for a very long time. It's in a lot of recipes. And so let's see what's in garlic. There we go. So this is the list of known ingredients in garlic. Like there's probably a lot more. And you can see in the middle section is the antioxidant section. There's like, I don't know, 40 or 50 different antioxidants in there. 20 different anti-inflammatory agents. Components that lower blood cholesterol and lower blood pressure. Minerals, amino acids, like that's just one whole plant. And so you can see the spectrum. And so if we looked at the list for broccoli, there'd be some common ones, but there'd be a whole host of other anti-inflammatory, blood pressure lowering, immune enhancing nutrients in broccoli. So just wanting to bring home like the diversity of what's in whole food. Oh, that looks good. What is it?
That would be masala carrot soup with some fresh parsley and probably some homemade sour cream like that.
Good. Oh.
That would share some whole food pictures with you. So this is a frittata. I make these pretty frequently. So it's got pastured eggs and some sauteed alliums and other veggies, some fresh thyme, some cheese.
Got the herbs in there.
Yep, fresh thyme.
Excellent.
And veggies. And
okay, wait a minute. What do we have?
That's
This
my
looks like
homemade.
might be sugar.
That's my homemade strawberry ice cream with raw honey
Okay.
to sweeten it.
Yeah.
Raw cultured sour cream as the base instead of milk. And then some grass-fed gelatin, fresh strawberries that I probably picked that day or the day before.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll take it. That's pretty self-explanatory. That's an awesome salad. So you got the nuts and seeds, which have their own spectrum of nutrients, the fermented cheese, the vegetables, the dried fruit, and really wide variety there. So we're, you hear the term clean diet. And so we're kind of touching into that. It's both what you don't take in, like limiting or reducing those pro-inflammatory foods, and increasing the anti-inflammatory and whole foods. So some examples of that, which I'm sure you've heard of, are Mediterranean diet, Whole30, Paleo. I mean, there's different variations on a theme, but most of them keep refined foods and refined sugars and refined foods very low. Lots of fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, clean protein. I want to also mention it's not only what you eat and don't eat, but when you eat it and how you consume it. And maybe some of you have heard of intermittent fasting. It's kind of getting a lot of play now and popularity, which is that, so our typical way is like you wake up in the morning, you start eating like then, and you like eat all day long until who knows when, and then you sleep. But evolutionarily, our systems are really more designed to eat sort of in a feast-fast sort of scenario. That's how we evolved. There wasn't like a constant stream of food coming in that we could just eat whenever we wanted. So our system thrives when it has breaks, where it can complete digestion, clean up, a clean house, get rid of old tired cells. It boosts the immune system. It reduces inflammation. So one of the ways is intermittent fasting, or 16-8, where you eat during an 8-hour window. So for instance, 10 a.m. is your first food, 6 p.m. is your last, and then you don't eat during that 16-hour period, which can have profound effects on physiology, including your immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And most people feel better when they do that. I'm like, wow, I feel lighter, I feel brighter, I don't feel so sluggish. Not everybody, but it's a fairly, it may sound a little harsh if that's not your usual pattern, but it's actually quite easy. Once you start doing it, you end up preferring it often. So that affects your immunity also.
So Jeff touched on the clean diet piece, the whole foods and all that. What I'd like to bring up is our kind of eating for immunity triad, which has the components of the clean diet and gut integrity and microbiome, and they all kind of are interrelated and affect each other. So, for instance, the clean diet is going to affect the balance of microbes, which will then affect the integrity of the gut, and vice versa. So, to dig into the foods for the microbiome specifically, this is a list of fermented foods, which is probably one of the most efficient ways, food-wise, to affect and positively influence your microbiome. So we've got sauerkraut. You can culture just about any kind of vegetable and fruit, for that matter. Fermented fish, something like salmon gravlax, fermented with honey and salt. My favorite is cultured raw dairy. I've got all kinds of
white
bottles of white stuff in my fridge. We have to label it. So I take, raw grass-fed milk, and we make kefir and yogurt and sour cream and butter. And then you're probably familiar with kombucha. And then water kefir is kind of some people call it natural soda. And then beet kvass is an awesome fermented drink. It's great for liver, gallbladder, and fat digestion. And then fermenting nuts, seeds, beans, grains, legumes is pretty important, not only for adding, beneficial bacteria, but to make them more digestible, because they're inherently not so digestible. But when you ferment them, soak them, sprout them, whatever, that kind of starts the process of breaking them down into their more absorbable forms.
That was our class last week on
awesome.
Sprouting
awesome.
Oh, it was?
and grains.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so I don't know if either of you, I recognize Heather from that class maybe.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, it was a good one.
Okay. So if I were to pick 2 ferments, if I had to pick 2, I'd probably pick sauerkraut and kefir. And I've got a picture of red cabbage sauerkraut up here for a couple reasons. One, because red cabbage will have those that higher amount of phytonutrients because of the pigments, and making it into sauerkraut is going to boost all of its nutrients. So in a cup of red cabbage, you might have, 50 or 60 milligrams of vitamin C. You make that into sauerkraut, and it can get as high as 700 milligrams of vitamin C. So all the vitamins and minerals and nutrients are made more bioavailable, and they actually increase because the bacteria that's fermenting the food, they make more vitamins on their own. So here's some benefits of sauerkraut. Those probiotics that are produced in fermenting actually, educate and activate your immune system. It also reduces inflammation and allergy response. It's really good for your brain health and your mood. And of course, cancer fighting is a component because of the antioxidants. And then kefir.
It's a white jar.
It's a white jar. It's a.
What is it?
This is
sour cream.
This is a picture of finished kefir that's ready to strain. So kefir is a really interesting symbiotic culture organism of beneficial yeasts and bacteria, and you put it in your raw milk, sit it on your counter, and within like 24 to 48 hours, you've got this fermented dairy beverage that's completely transformed. So if you were to compare kefir with yogurt, yogurt might have 2 to 5 different beneficial strains, whereas kefir can have 20 to 50 or more. I've heard even as high as 60.
So it's a much more complex ecosystem than yogurt.
Yes, it's got, and it's not only beneficial bacteria, so yogurt's got beneficial bacteria, but kefir has beneficial bacteria and beneficial yeasts.
Not all yeast is bad.
No, not all yeast is bad. So it's if you have pathogenic yeast like Candida, the yeast in kefir will help to kind of balance
Push
that
it
out,
out.
push it out. And if you're making kefir with grass-fed dairy, you've got high levels of vitamin K2, and they're made more absorbable, and so is the calcium in the milk. So the minerals and the vitamins are broken down into an absorbable form, and you can like uptake more nutrition. I've had people who were able to reduce or reverse their lactose intolerance by drinking kefir.
Oh, cool.
And we don't have any males in the audience, but I will say for the women, repopulating, you can actually repopulate, your genital area with kefir in preparation for birthing your baby, because baby, when they come through the birth canal, they get their first, so to speak, probiotic gulp, their first inoculation of microbes. And using something like kefir will change that, change the makeup of the microbes in the vaginal canal, and which is pretty important for babies' first start. And then also anti-cancer and great for inflammation.
One of the things I love about kefir is that it's, of all the fermented things, it's so easy.
So easy.
You're not heating anything. You're not cooking anything. You're literally pouring milk over the kefir grains and letting it sit. And
awesome.
So if I would say if you're new to fermenting and there was one that you wanted to just kind of dip your feet in and try, that's a really good one. And,
it's a really good point.
We had a class in a past co-op class series on making homemade kefir, and we ordered the grains from a place called Fusion Tea online.
Oh, yes, it's my favorite source.
And they were the healthiest, most beautiful grains, and they just came in the mail in a little condiment type container with a lid, and we're just so healthy and active, and they're still going at our house. So
cool.
At my house
if
too.
you're interested in giving one a try, that's a good one.
Nice. And sauerkraut's not far behind. I mean, you can make a pile of sauerkraut for $10, and it's
like a crock full.
Yeah.
So again, this eating for immunity triad, the clean diet, the gut integrity, the microbiome, they all influence each other.
So which one are you going to now?
Yes, thank you for. So we've touched on the microbiome foods. Now I'd like to talk about the gut integrity foods. One of my favorite topics outside of ferments. So when I think about gut integrity foods, I think about meat stock and bone broth and unprocessed cod liver oil. So by meat stock and bone broth, the differences between the two would be in cooking time, really. So meat stock is kind of a short cooked, more meaty preparation, and then bone broth is more focused on bones, and there's a lot longer cooking time. And the reasons to use the two different options would be meat stock is gentler. There's less glutamine. So if you have a really compromised system, that's what you want to start with. So stock and broth, they have a lot of absorbable minerals, and they also contain the basic building blocks of the intestinal tract. So Emily, you mentioned how can you regenerate enterocytes? this is what feeds and builds your gut lining. The glucosamine, the chondroitin, and the other glycosaminoglycans are kind of the building blocks for your connective tissue, your joints, your gut, your skin. Bone broth is a great beauty regimen, by the way. And you were mentioning that.
Oh yeah, I had some mild arthritis in my knees, mainly just in hiking and stuff, and I started doing the bone broth pretty regularly, and that has improved a lot. Like, I'm pleasantly surprised.
It's so soothing.
Yeah,
Soothing on the tummy.
My joints just don't hurt as much as they did before.
So after meat stock and bone broth would come unprocessed cod liver oil. So by unprocessed, I mean cod liver oil that's not been heated and deodorized and stripped of its natural inherent vitamin A and D. A lot of cod liver oils on the market, they actually process it so much that they have to add back in synthetic vitamin A and vitamin D. So pictured here is one of my favorite brands. It's an extra virgin cod liver oil. It's produced without any heat or pressurization or anything like that. And it's amazing for sensitive people.
Do you have any disclaimers you need to bring up about that?
Disclaimer?
You're not an investor in the company? Or
No,
not getting
no.
paid for that announcement?
No.
Okay, just checking.
Thank you for checking.
So, keep it clean here.
Yep. I have no financial ties to Rosita. So unprocessed cod liver oil is the best food source for bioavailable forms of vitamin A and D. Vitamin D is not actually a vitamin at all. It's a steroid hormone, and it's also an epigenetic influencer. So it influences over 2,000 genes in our bodies, and it's integral for an immune system response. I know there's some chronically ill people who take pretty large doses of natural vitamin D. And then vitamin A, there's kind of a chicken and an egg scenario with vitamin A and leaky gut. So vitamin A deficiency can lead to leaky gut and malabsorption, and then leaky gut and malabsorption can lead to a deficiency in vitamin A. We can't really process well anyway. We can't process the precursors to vitamin A from things like carrots and other vegetables.
So the body has to.
And there's a complex
enzymatic
process
to get to A.
Yes.
From a carrot.
Right. So if you don't have that, strong digestive fire and all of those enzyme pieces that are needed, this is your best option. And vitamin A is also these two vitamins are generally found together in nature. So cod liver oil, liver in general, pastured egg yolks, grass-fed butter.
But there's like a synergy between them.
Right, they work together. So the eating for immunity spectrum, we talked about clean diet, whole foods and all that. We talked about things like Whole30, paleo, what's the third one you mentioned? Mediterranean, yes. So for generally healthy people, that's awesome. You're gonna lose, if you go to whole foods diet from a standard American diet, you're gonna lose weight, you're gonna sleep great.
Inflammation levels are going to come down.
Levels, your immune
less
system.
Risk of interrupting.
No, that's okay. Your sex drive's going to improve, and you'll sleep better, and your moods will be smoother. And that that can work on an 80-20 basis, where 80% of your diet is clean, and then you have the occasional treat, and you are well balanced and.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that a little bit, the 80-20 thing, because I feel like being stressed out about eating just perfectly is actually not healthy. Like having a anxiety and a fear and a neurosis around, I can't eat that. Like your body responds to that. So I'm a I'm a fan of occasionally just like going for it, because that's
Going for the cake?
going for the cake and enjoy the heck out of it. Like if you're going to do it, once in a while, like the 80-20 thing. Cake all the time is going to start impairing your system and is going to start dragging you down. Yeah.
And then there are a lot of the people that I work with and you work with, people who are more compromised.
Mm-hmm.
So people with pretty severe leaky gut are going to need something more significant than just a standard whole foods diet. And that's kind of where my work comes in with the GAPS protocol. And I'll explain that in a little bit.
So they need much more intensive repair,
right,
and taking away those potential sensitivities, and
right,
sort of starting from the bottom and working
and
their way back up.
And longer term healing and more intensive gut healing protocol.
Mm-hmm.
So people that might need to consider something like that would be kids on the spectrum, kids with learning disabilities, severe digestive issues, maybe chronic diarrhea, or ulcerative colitis, Lyme disease, mold toxicity, and those with multiple food allergies and intolerances. Like a lot of my clients, I see 20 plus food sensitivities showing up. And that's a good sign that you need to do some more intensive gut healing. So I work with a protocol called GAPS, which stands for the Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And I'll just touch on it briefly. It's not the focus of our talk today, but this is what I work with to kind of, on a more intensive level, work on that immune component and healing the leaky gut. Mm-hmm. So we take out foods that might naturally be healthy, but for a leaky, compromised gut are going to break down improperly and become food for pathogens instead of us. So that includes complex carbs like potatoes and sweet potatoes and any starches. And then we emphasize the fermented foods and probiotics, and we emphasize the healing foods like the meat stocks and bone broths. I'm talking therapeutic levels, like adults drinking 3 to 6 cups per day therapeutically. And then over time, over consistently using nutrient-dense traditional foods, we restore long-term nutrient deficiencies. And then we have a specific series of food reintroductions, starting out from pretty basic foods like boiled meats and vegetables, and then gradually adding in more and more foods as the digestion can handle it. And then we also include some detox and immune strategies.
Oh.
Would you like to talk about the other ways?
Yeah. Just want to. We're kind of coming towards the close here, and then have some Q&A at the end. But just want to say, like, eating affects our immune system profoundly, but there are a lot of other influences. Our immune system is really almost like a peripheral nervous system. It very much responds to our brain. It responds to our thoughts, our emotions. And so just want to not forget that, like, how we interact and live our lives affects our immunity a lot. And so I wanted to just bring it to sort of the more emotional aspects of things. Here's a slide showing IgA, which are the immunoglobulins, are antibodies that are involved in, like, protecting our barriers, our gut barrier, our nose barrier. It's the first line of defense. And this is what happens after an emotional state. And then the next 6 hours. So this is someone feeling an emotional state and then checking their levels for 6 hours. And you can see on the top, after feeling a sense of frustration and anger, and I would add fear and isolation, for the next 6 hours, the immune system is suppressed. Like, those immunoglobulin levels drop down, and that leads to a suppressed immune system. And then the bottom shows the opposite. When one feels a sense of compassion and caring and connection, that my IgA just went up, I think. Compassion and caring and connection, our immune system responds dramatically, and you can see, like, immediately those immunoglobulin levels go up and they stay elevated for 6 hours. So I just, it's a it's a challenging time, especially now around those kinds of things and around fear and isolation. And I think it's really important to take conscious steps to sort of like make sure we connect and that we're experiencing connection with other human beings and caring and compassion, because our immune system is responding to those feelings.
And heal from your kitchen. So I'm a strong believer that we have a lot of personal agency in our choices for immune health and gut health and whole body health. And we get to decide 3 times a day, what messages we're going to give to our, beautiful complex immune systems. And so we have a lot of power in affecting our immune system. So I would just encourage you guys to be proactive and to decide what you're going to feed. So heal from your kitchen and heal from your heart.
Yeah, I think being robust and healthy in terms of our immune system was just like a natural part of life. Like before sort of modern life, like everyone was active. We're eating only whole foods and great varieties because that's the only thing that was there, right? So it takes more conscious decision making now to nourish ourselves, and it's really a revolutionary act to be really healthy. Like the average is not healthy. You don't want to be average, so we have to do things different than everybody does to get effects that are different than that. And actually, this is an area we could choose, and so we are excited about that, and hope some of that comes across, and hopefully some of this was helpful, and would love to open it up to any comments, questions, and hear your wisdom you may have around this or comments you want to make as well.
Just share a comment that you mentioned the fear and anxiety of the current state of affairs, and I find it really calming to think about the fact that I have the capacity to heal from my kitchen and to take control of that, and to have to influence those things, because in a sea of things that we don't have a lot of control over, I find it really comforting to think about healing from
Right on.
Yes.
Right on.
Yeah, your strong immune system is where it's at. And you get to influence that in so many ways.
You get to eat like your life depends on
Yeah,
Right
I
on.
like that, Emily.
I love it. We need to add that to a slide. Right here. Eat like your life depends on it.
Because it does.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments?
So I'm just curious. I mean, there is a lot of research.
Hold on, Heather. Let me
Hang on, Heather.
turn
We
you
need
up.
to turn you up.
I'm muted. So I have a question kind of about COVID, and it's fine if you don't want to answer. There's a lot of research that's coming out about your immune system and COVID. My father had COVID, was in intensive care, was, the full as bad as it can get, but lived. And I'm curious, he's now on a renal diet because of COVID, and suggestions on dieting when you do have to have a renal diet, right? Like there is a broad spectrum of vegetables you can have, but he's typical American diet person. So just curious on it boosting his immune system after a pretty significant event.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine he got a list of yeses and nos, right, from the renal doctor, and I would say anything that he could do to pick as many different things on that list as possible to at least get the variety. They'd be limited, and some things he can and can't have. But the wider the variety, the better. And then, like Melanie was talking about, that the integrity of his gut is critical. So to enhance that microbiome, to heal the leaky gut, so that whatever he's getting the most out of. Because so much, like because of the compromised gut, stuff is just flying through, or big things are getting absorbed that shouldn't be. So I think just following those principles. Yeah.
And if you want to find out more about meat, stock, and bone broth, just go to honestbody.com. That's my website. and then just search bone broth, meat stock. It should pull up the article that I've written. And there's a downloadable PDF for that.
And I'll say there's great recipes there. So if you're looking for recipes, I love.
I think I've got that
Melanie's
curry
recipes.
recipe
Yeah.
on the website.
A question came through the chat from our other participant. She says that there are resources, excuse me, that you might suggest to read, looking for books or other material to read further on this issue.
Yeah. The Gut Ecology Syndrome would be an amazing book to read to understand gut health and its influence on the rest of your body's
Who's
health.
the author of that one?
Yeah, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. And in October, her next book is coming out, The Gut and Physiology Syndrome, which I am so excited to read.
Which may be a little more for the general
It's for the general
audience.
public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one coming out in October might be a.
But I'd say
either,
both of them
yeah.
would be great. She's a neurologist, but she writes in a very relatable way, and I would say it's quite easy to understand.
I have one more question. Let's say you have to take an antibiotic for some reason and you're trying to rebuild. Do you can you recommend tips for rebuilding after an antibiotic?
So take a probiotic at the same time, and specifically, it's actually available at drugstores. Culturelle, which has the Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG strain, which has been clinically proven to really help to avoid antibiotic issues that can, like diarrhea and so forth. That would be a beginning step.
And then the ferments.
Yes, the ferments.
I had a client of mine who was seeing a specialist and was on long-term antibiotics, and she had tried all the sort of pill-based probiotics and was having sort of, somewhat help, but still loose bowels. And a friend of hers took one of the fermentation classes and just started giving her all kinds of fermented everything, and her gut cleared up quite rapidly, where the sort of pill-based ones just couldn't quite do it. It helped, but so that was I didn't forget that.
Thank you. It looks like something else came in the chat. Nope, I was mistaken.
Great. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you so much to you both. I feel so lucky that you've both been here and been willing to share your time and your knowledge with the group. And I've learned a lot, and thank you so much.
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
And thank you all for coming and joining us this evening.
Yeah. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Heather says thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for coming.